welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the video. Do subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content as well. The Bharata First team runs several quizzes. Do participate in them. If you like our content, do contribute to keep it alive. Let me also take this opportunity to inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you in your competitive exams and transform the way you learn. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com for more details and register now. Experience a whole new way of gaining knowledge. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of the video. Please go through it. And now on to the discussion. Parliament's monsoon session ended on a stormy note on Wednesday, 2 days ahead of schedule. From the time the session began on July 19th, opposition parties had disrupted both houses over the government's unwillingness to allow discussion on the Pegasus snooping scandal, the farmers' protests, and the rise in prices, especially of auto fuels. Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla and Rajya Sabha Chairman Venkaiah Naidu expressed anguish over the disruptions. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the recently concluded monsoon session of Parliament. Joining me on the program today are Professor Sunil K. Choudhary, political analyst, Parsa Venkateshwar Rao Jr., senior journalist, and KV Prasad, senior journalist as well. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. All right. Parsa, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze, how would you look back at the recently concluded monsoon session of Parliament? You're someone who's looked at and watched Parliament proceedings from close quarters. How would you look back at this monsoon session of Parliament?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised at the way it panned out, this monsoon session, because you see, there were three major issues that the opposition wanted a discussion on. One was the Pegasus thing, second was the farmers issue, and the third was the COVID. And all the three issues were uncomfortable for the government. I mean, they could have had the debate, but they thought if they could avoid it. And they wanted their legislative business to go on. They wanted to pass the bills which were important for them, like the OBC Commission bill, which was passed after all and all that. They had many bills to pass. And this has been a set pattern, Frank, for all the governments. Governments want to push their legislative business, and the opposition parties want discussion on some of the key issues. Somewhere they should have met and compromised and allowed something to happen this side and something to happen that side. But I think the BJP would not yield ground. And I'm not surprised, because there was many a time when Congress also did not yield ground, and many a session went completely waste, in the sense there was no work done. But at the last minute, they would allow some important legislative work to be done, and bills were passed without discussion, but because the bills had to be passed for the working of the government. Now, what I find is, what we have to look for is there any way out of this kind of an impasse? Personally, I would have felt that the presiding officers could have done something. I know the presiding officers are helpless. The presiding officers can only reflect the mood of the House. But I find here, especially in Rajya Sabha, that not enough effort is being made to accommodate the opposition. And secondly, the presiding officers, and they never had, and let's not put the blame just on this government and these presiding officers, they never had that commanding thing to tell the government, to tell the treasury benches, okay, you have to yield ground on this. That, I think, that position they don't have. Neither Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla nor Rajya Sabha Chairman Venkaiah Naidu. So that, I think, makes it difficult. And how do we come out of this thing, And what I find a little disturbing is, in Rajya Sabha, the Rajya Sabha Chairman Venkaiah Naidu wants to discipline the House. Now I feel that disciplining the House bit is a very difficult thing. It might really boomerang, and the chairman, who should be commanding the confidence on all sides of the House, may alienate a section of the people.
Absolutely. All right. So we'll take this particular aspect forward. KV Prasad, let me come to you now. What is the middle ground? Can a middle ground be struck? Whose prerogative is it to strike this middle ground? Parsa has just mentioned the role of the presiding officers. What about the floor leaders? What about the political parties themselves as well?
Well, at the risk of repeating, I would like to say every time I say this in the program, the dictum of parliamentary and parliamentary affairs is while the opposition can have its say, the government will have its way. Having said that, over the years, we have noticed that whenever there's a stalemate, there is a spirit of accommodation, which means the opposition and the issue the opposition wants to discuss and debate are accommodated by the government of the day. At the same time, the government of the day has its own priorities, the bills in particular that meet with the legislative session, whatever they want to push on this legislative agenda, other things. Also, so that's a very time-honored practice. Now, is there a middle ground? The middle ground is found out by leaders, all right, but there has to be a political agreement. Unless there is a political agreement on both sides, okay, and it could be midway, it could be, you come down 4 steps, I'll come down 3 steps, and let's move forward. Let's agree. We might disagree on many issues, but we have to find a way and take it forward. Now, I'll just give 1 or 2 examples which show this, despite the stalemate, governments of the day were either forced to accept a situation. For instance, the last 2 JPCs, if you remember, we had one on the 2G. Several sessions were washed out. 2 or at least 2 sessions, I remember, were severely affected the working. Yet, finally, the government of the day agreed for a JPC. And mind you, that happened when the then leader of the House, in particular, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, held confabulations with the leaders of opposition and agreed to it. And in the next session, they announced. So the logjam was broken. 10 years before that, sometime in 2001, 2002, you had the Tehelka episode. Parliament was rocked by this episode, following by several other issues around it. And then came the security scam. And finally, the government of the day agreed for a security scam JPC. And how did it happen? Finally, a meeting took place between Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and then the leader of opposition, Sonia Gandhi. And this groundwork was done by parliamentary affairs ministers and parliamentary managers of different political parties who had the issue. So a way was found. As I said, government will have finally its way, but you have to allow the opposition to have its say in parliament. So this has been a dictum. Here in this particular session, what appears from a distance, and also because many of us could not attend physically because of the COVID protocols in place, but whatever one gathered from what appeared and what we spoke to a couple of people, there seems to be a breakdown of communication between the 2 sides.
Right. So breakdown of communications between 2 sides, probably that needs to be fixed. And that can happen outside Parliament only. Then will we see things happening within Parliament itself. Sunil K. Choudhary, let me come across to you now. What was it that it stood out? What was it that, you would like to speak about or pinpoint with regards to this monsoon session of Parliament?
And I think I broadly agree with both the panelists on the aftermath of the parliamentary session. I would only say that if I just go for the productive side of this monsoon session, I would say, keeping in view the past record of the parliament in terms of conducting of the business, as far as business is concerned, like 25% on average, 25% of both the houses putting together have actually functioned. And one could see how 14 bills were passed by both the houses. And even the one important constitutional amendment bill got passed by both the houses. But the important point, which actually pained all of us as citizens of the country, responsible citizens of the country, is that the way the parliamentarians actually worked in the House and how the chairman of the Rajya Sabha actually emotionally broke down, expressing anguish over the conduct of the members. I think these are some very important issues which need to be addressed. Prasad sir has rightly stated that there are many issues where convergence between the opposition and the government could have taken place before the beginning of the House, as has happened in previous cases as well. But I would urge that there should be some important convergence of issues between the two, and the parliamentarians should come up and just frame some important conventions of working of the parliament in such a way that these things should not have been taken out of the parliament, because they set very bad precedents for others to watch, as we could have seen that all these proceedings of the parliament are being shown outside the country. So that sets very bad precedents. So the temple of democracy should not be trampled by the behavior of the members. Unlike the preceding incidents where one could see the ruckus in the house, where the members are shouting slogans, raising slogans, coming on the well of the house. But this time one could see slightly that it's moved beyond it. I like assaulting the marshals, sitting on the table of the secretary staff. I mean, these are not the good signs of where we see that parliament is the temple of democracy. So the members must come out, they must stand together, and opposition should move beyond its ideological agenda of targeting just the government. And the government should also see the issues and sensitivities of the members or the parties of the opposition, where they could just gel together and see that this temple of democracy should not be trampled with these kinds of practice.
Absolutely, very rightly said. Parsa, let me take that particular point forward with you. Talking about precedents, talking about the conduct of members of parliament. I mean, they are called honorable members of parliament, but the way some of them have behaved and what we've seen and what we've witnessed in this monsoon session of parliament has been nothing honorable. There hasn't been anything honorable about it. So, would you say that the quality of discussions, debate, and deliberations over the years also has gone down considerably?
Apart from that, what happens, I think what we need to ask a question, an uncomfortable question is, why is it that the members are resorting to this kind of an unruly behavior? I think there's a certain kind of frustration in the opposition that because the government has the numbers, they won't yield ground, and they have no space or opportunity to raise questions and express their opposition, the criticism. Now, I think if the government opens up a little space and not be worried about what the criticism is hurled against the government from the opposition side, I think that will sort of bring down the volatility of the House. That's my personal view. That allow them to speak. If in the whole, even if in these 3 weeks of time, if one day was devoted to, if not on all the issues, except say on Pegasus or in the farmers issue, and said, okay, on this day we will discuss only this, and allow the opposition to speak. And I think that after venting their criticism, this unruly behavior might, I'm only saying might have been avoided. So that spirit of accommodation, because the government is in an advantageous position, the government has the numbers, the obligation and the responsibility falls on the government to accommodate the opposition. The opposition is really frustrated because they feel outside in the country, they don't have much voice to express themselves. Inside the House, where they could, even though they are in a minority, even though they don't have the numbers, they can sort of articulate certain criticism of the government. They are not being allowed to do so. Now that somewhere, I think the government has to be more flexible. Other governments have been flexible. They are also very, very, any government, when any party which is in power is not willing to yield ground, They think all the opposition objections, all the opposition demands for any debate are irrelevant and that they don't count. And all that counts is the legislative business. So that, I think that position has to change. I think government must show a little more accommodation and then hope, yes, the opposition doesn't behave as it did. I know this is not justifying or rationalizing the kind of behavior indulged in by the opposition members. I think opposition without any rules from the House should not carry placards, should not be shouting slogans, and should not, even if they come into the well of the House, they should not just stand there and not create ruckus there. Long time ago in the when the Vajpayee government time, Balayogi was the Lok Sabha speaker. He tried to evolve the conduct of how to sort of even protesting, and he tried to evolve the code of conduct. But it just fell apart, and it was very, very sad that it didn't work out. He was one of the few persons who tried to reach out to all sections of the House, but that is required.
Absolutely. Taking this particular aspect forward and building on this point, KV Prasad, let's talk about this. Disruptions are common and disruptions have been taking place in Indian Parliament for a while now. But there has been something different about the disruptions this time around, because there seems to be a sense of animosity. And like Parsa rightly pointed out, it's probably the sense of frustration within the opposition ranks that is coming out in this way in Parliament. That is one. Secondly, talking about yielding ground, this government has been criticized from a long time. In fact, from day one, that it has not been yielding ground. It is not willing to take criticism or constructive criticism and meet somewhere midway through. How much of ground would the government like to yield here?
No, that's a question we have to see, because we've seen it in the last 5 years, 7 years now. Government, and as I said, you have a government which has the numbers, particularly in Lok Sabha, and Rajya Sabha too. They have a very, very comfortable, I would say, a working majority if one were to look at it. So the issue is not that. I'm reminded, just to respond to you, in two ways. I remember way back in 2004, when Somnath Chatterjee was the speaker, there was this constant chatter that was going on in the opposition, or the constant to and fro between the members of opposition, agreeing, disagreeing, while the debate was on. And one point of time, Mr. Chatterjee said, listen, if you don't have to agree with what, just because you're hearing a particular viewpoint, doesn't mean you're agreeing to it. And when your time comes, you please respond to it and say no, get with your points. That's the way in which you should carry forward. That was one way. And I was reminded of another thing, of this power of the speaker. Way back in, again, I refer to the Deve Gowda days, when P.S. Sangma was the speaker, there was a logjam between the opposition, not so much the opposition, but with the Congress party in particular, and Deve Gowda, the government, United Government, and also some members of opposition. For 2 days or on, it went on. And finally, one day, the speaker said, the House stands adjourned. And then he said, you people first sort out your problem outside, come to in the House with the solution. There's no point coming to the House and wrangling every day here inside the House, and I have to adjourn the House without any. So he kind of gave a 2-3 day hiatus break. And it led to a resolution. Now, that has happened in Indian Parliament. But the question is, as I mentioned the point, there has to be a political decision. How much of what we want to say here. So in this case, I think if the opposition was insisting on Pegasus, the government had its say. Mr. Vaishnav has already made a statement, and there's nothing more to it. So, and I think at one point of time, somebody did mention to the fact that in Rajya Sabha, you have the convention of asking for clarifications. That did not happen. So it was just parliamentary tools that are available, were they employed. But as Mr. Parsa was also saying, an element of frustration must have crept into the opposition for inability to raise issues on the floor of the House, which they want to do it.
Absolutely. So, Sunil Choudhary, now this leads me to my next question, whether the solution to the problems that we see in Parliament, do they really lie outside of Parliament between the political parties, and they need to talk about it, address it there? Then we can see smooth functioning of Parliament.
Absolutely fine. That because until unless you discuss, deliberate, and debate on those issues before the holding of the session of the Parliament, I think you cannot address these kinds of indiscipline within the Parliament itself. But let me Frank, place it in the context of the politics which has been taking place before the holding of the Parliament session and in the aftermath of session. Let's see, in the context of assembly elections which have taken place recently, in the context of West Bengal, Assam, and others, and the forthcoming assembly elections which may take place, say, in 2021-22, in the context of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, and even Uttaranchal. So somehow I see that parties which used to see as the coalition of opposition is now turning towards opposition of coalitions. So this inter-party feuds and showing their projections as the solid collective oppositions, these parties have actually turned into projecting themselves as individual identities. So instead of having broader deliberations and discussions, they are trying to focus on their individual projections to target the government and to make themselves more popular vis-a-vis the people, and to just make this government uncomfortable and unpopular among the people, because now the parties seem to be in an election mode, because they know that this is the best way to show, because parliamentary sessions are not held regularly. So whenever the parliamentary sessions take place in the coming months, the projection is that this government is incredible government. It has not functioned on many issues, and the disruption of the House by all political parties across board show that's dysfunctionality of the government. So one could see the context in which these things have taken place in the current session of the monsoon. I would also say that Parliament itself must evolve some important issues addressing the indiscipline among the members, because this is going to be the long-term affair. And as I have mentioned that from ruckus of the House, what one could have accepted it, whether it is in terms of raising slogans or using placards, that could be seen, because you want to just place your issues before the House, before the government, and the government is not listening to it. But there are different ways, there are different platforms where these things could be addressed. But from ruckus of the House, we are just trying to assault the members of the staff, members of the security staff, the marshals. That is unacceptable, and that doesn't set good precedents in the functioning of the parliamentary democracy. So I think the important issues of indiscipline must be addressed in a broader way by all the members of, because today this government is in power, next day another government will be in power. So I think we should just see how the issues could be conversed by both the opposition and the government. Let me just say, concluded with one important sentence. When the Indian press was formed formally in 19th century, the important slogan of the press was oppose, oppose, oppose. What we could have been witnessing in the case of the function of the parliament for past couple of decades is that the government tries to propose and the opposition tries to oppose. I think this opposition proposition must converge somewhere, either before the beginning of the House or during the session of the House.
Absolutely. I think very well said and very rightly put. All right, time to get quick closing comments from all my panelists with the best way forward. And, much as we would not like to hear it, but like Sunil Choudhary has just pointed out, it seems like this is going to be a long-term affair. So talking about this long-term affair and dealing with indiscipline and just the way forward, Parsa, let me hear thoughts from you about what's the best way forward.
I think the presiding officers in the two houses must take the opposition into confidence, and somewhere the government must defer to the presiding officers. The presiding officer says, yes, give some space to the opposition. The government must yield to not under the pressure from the opposition, but in deference to the presiding officer. The presiding officer has to play the crucial role of being the bridge between the government and the opposition.
Prasad?
Well, I think that's very aptly put. And just to add one sentence to opposition, I heard probably 19th century England, maybe Parsa could correct me. It says the role of opposition is to oppose, expose, and depose the government. So that has been a tactic.
Yeah.
So that being the case, but yes, a way via media should be found, because eventually that's the only place where we make laws, debate, and discuss issues which are agitating people, and also issues that concern people. Some issues that we know today, some we don't even know, but many members of parliament do study and find out and talk about things which may come up, issues that may come up in the future. Be prepared for it. How does the country prepare for it? So all these are issues that we need to look at seriously. And probably, as somebody had mentioned in an article recently, probably we could follow Westminster, the UK model, where there was set day for opposition. The opposition comes, holds its say. Nothing is binding on the government. You just hear views. So it gives the space, and then the government goes around and does what eventually is the government's decision to carry the day for itself and for the country.
Absolutely. And Sunil Choudhary, please close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
Yes, I think conciliation and confidence by both the government and opposition must actually pave the way for kind of cooperation of the working of the parliament and the sessions of the parliament.
Absolutely. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for being here on The Big Picture. It was a pleasure, really. Thank you for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, what's coming out of this discussion is that what we have witnessed in the monsoon session has been highly deplorable. The onus is on all honorable members to conduct themselves in a dignified manner and ensure that they don't set bad precedents. All stakeholders have to find a way to ensure smooth functioning of the temple of democracy. The presiding officers need to do more, the floor leaders need to take extra efforts, and the political parties themselves have to take the onus upon themselves to thrash out any kind of differences. We've seen a total breakdown of communication between the Treasury benches and the opposition in the monsoon session of Parliament. The government should yield some ground and cede space to the opposition. The opposition, in turn, must have its say and allow the government to have its way. The issue of indiscipline must be addressed with a broader consensus between political parties and MPs. The presiding officer should do more and be a bridge, and a conciliatory note must be hit. Well then, before I go, once again, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the video. Do subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs several quizzes. Do participate in them. If you like our content, please contribute to keep it alive. Let me also take this opportunity to inform you about Bharata First Knowledge Center, an initiative that will help each one of you in your competitive exams and transform the way you learn. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com for more details and register now. Experience a whole new way of gaining knowledge. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of the video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.